Getting to put on this costume again is like wrapping yourself in a nice warm blanket. Well, I guess it's that time to talk about another Persona game, 2 this time. In June 2023, there were a couple of announcement trailers for upcoming Persona titles. One was for a full-on remake of Persona 3 that we were finally getting, and fans including myself were excited to see, and the other was yet another spin-off for Persona 5. We're talking about the latter today. You know, I personally thought Persona 5 Strikers was a pretty good way to end things for the Persona 5 brand. It was a great sequel despite the vastly different gameplay, it expanded on a few pre-existing characters, and the new ones weren't half bad either, with a solid enough ending to conclude things. So why does ATLUS want to keep giving us more of the Phantom Thieves when we clearly don't need them anymore? Profit. As cynical as that may sound, it really does seem like the overall goal is profit at this point because Persona 5 is still popular, and they want to milk the name for all it's worth. I had been defending ATLUS for a long while, saying that they're not doing that at all and are just trying to run a business. But now that they've released Persona 5 Tactica, I can't justify what they've done. They made another Persona 5 game when we absolutely did not need one, and they should be focusing on Persona 6. That's why when Persona 3 Reload got announced at the exact same time, I and many others were way more looking forward to that. We were able to imagine the possibilities that ATLUS could take with an already well-loved game and improve all of FES's and Portable's problems. Even after release, I feel like Persona 5 Tactica just kinda came and went. Already I don't see a lot of people talking about it anymore, and that could partly be because Persona 3 Reload's completely overshadowed everything, but I believe it's because people are now truly getting sick of seeing the Phantom Thieves. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I love Persona 5 and Royal with all of my heart, but I'd be lying if I said that I didn't understand the frustration. I too want to move on from Persona 5 because I think we've had more than our fill of the Phantom Thieves and their adventures. We should just enjoy the time we spent with them while it lasted, rather than groan at the thought of ATLUS wanting to keep going. I wasn't there when Persona 4 and Golden went through a similar phase of being overexposed, but I can only imagine it might not have been as bad as it could have gone, seeing how most of the spin-off games are much smaller than the main title. Arena and Ultimax were fairly simple fighting games, Dancing All Night was an easy to pick up rhythm game, and the Persona Q titles were the only other RPGs that star the investigation team. Meanwhile, the Phantom Thieves not only have an already popular vanilla release and an even more popular re-release with extra content, but they had Persona Q2, which was another full-blown RPG. There was then Persona 5 Strikers, which was more action-based but an RPG nonetheless. Dancing in Starlight is probably the most basic of the Persona 5 titles, but it was far more shallow compared to Dancing All Night, and now we have yet another RPG, albeit more focused on tactics and strategy. If you do the math, there's altogether just about, if not slightly less P5 content compared to P4's, but I think the problem here is that the Persona 5 spin-offs are a lot more heavy-handed compared to P4's, and that's also not including the various crossovers with mobile games that the Phantom Thieves have been a part of, as well as Joker's appearances in both Smash Bros. Ultimate and Catherine Full Body. Like I said though, I wasn't there when Persona 4 was at the height of its popularity, so I couldn't really tell. I do, however, have a guy that has experienced that, so care to join in, Nam?
Yes, sir, I will. As someone who jumped into the Persona series when Persona 4 content was at its peak, I got to experience firsthand how the public opinion surrounding this game morphed over the years. Oversaturation and overexposure is a very real thing, and plays a large part in franchise fatigue. I remember the days when it felt as though no matter where you looked, there was just another P4 related thing coming out. Great for new fans or diehards, not so great for those who were looking to move on. I'll admit, even as Persona 4's biggest shill, I was starting to get sick of it by the time the Persona 4 Golden anime came out. It's part of the reason why Persona 5's original release was just so cathartic to me. It almost acted as a light at the end of the tunnel, and having that space away from P4 allowed fans to look back on the game much more fondly than during the spin-off era. It's funny to think that nearly a decade later, and Persona 5 is suffering from the same fate. A bunch of spin-offs and tie-ins with no new game in sight. I made a video on the subject a couple of months ago, so I won't go into too much detail here, but I will say that despite the oversaturation of Persona 5 content over the years, there was still a part of me that was a little excited for Tactica's release, even though it didn't look to be anything special. At least that's what I got from a first glance.
Well, I guess the bottom line is that Persona 5 Tactica could not have come at a worse time, and it's a shame that it's going to get a bit of unfair judgment based on that.
I'm hoping you're realizing the irony in talking about ATLUS and their poor timing while you're currently wearing a Joker costume.
Listen, I paid over $400 for this upgraded costume, specially tailored towards my tubby ass, and it's only getting tighter with age. It's made entirely out of pleather, and in the middle of lockdown when cons hadn't reopened yet. So yeah, I'm getting as much use out of this damn thing as I can, and I'm not gonna let ATLUS's weird decisions stop me. Alright, enough with the complaints for now. What does Tactica do different compared to the other Persona spin-offs we've had thus far? Well, as previously mentioned, we've gone from a turn-based RPG to an action RPG, and now we're trying out the tactical RPG genre. Something similar to Fire Emblem or Final Fantasy Tactics, but probably more accurate to say something like XCOM or the Mario and Rabbids titles with the particular style of gameplay that Tactica tries to incorporate. This isn't even the first time ATLUS tried doing tactical RPGs, as the Devil Survivor games did that way before Tactica, both with the original DS versions and the enhanced 3DS versions. One day I will talk about those titles as well, but right now I want to focus on Tactica.
Whether you agree that this title should exist or not, to Tactica's credit, this is the first new game in the series to reach across all of the latest platforms. Sure, Strikers did also come out for PC and the Switch, but Xbox owners were pretty much left in the dust. With Tactica, all bases are covered now. And it's great to see the Persona series expanding as far as it has done since the old days, where the franchise was especially niche. It's almost like branching out to other consoles increases your sales or something. Who knew?
The footage you'll be seeing in this video is from the PC version, since there was a deal on CD keys that was far too good for me not to take, and it included all of the DLC. This site is gonna make me broke someday. As far as I can recall, I thankfully didn't encounter any bugs or crashes, though I did notice the frame rate being a little choppier at a few points, and I believe it was from after coming out of the Velvet Room. ATLUS have probably patched this since then, but might be something to keep in mind if you're considering getting Tactica on PC. And we're going to be covering it all in this one review. The plot, the gameplay, the DLC, everything. No holding back this time and no extended thoughts video. We're going full spoilers, because otherwise you'd probably see only maybe the first third or the first half of the game at best. It also assumes that you've played at least Vanilla Persona 5 all the way to the end, so there's not only going to be full spoilers for Tactica, there's also going to be full spoilers for Vanilla Persona 5 at the very least. So if you haven't played either that or Tactica, turn this video off, come back later, and we'll see you then. Alright, Nam, shall we go over the story for Tactica?
Wait, Tactica has a story?
Yeah, but you'd be forgiven for not noticing.
Oh, good. I thought I missed something important.
Alrighty, this is a pretty familiar setup, isn't it? The Phantom Thieves are hanging out in LeBlanc right before things start kicking off. It's set during Ren's final days after getting out of juvie and spending time with his buddies before going back to his hometown. Representative Toshiro Kasukabe is one of the candidates for the next Prime Minister of Japan after Shido got arrested, but has mysteriously disappeared without a trace. The broadcast is interrupted, however, and LeBlanc suddenly starts shaking violently. When the thieves look outside, they see that they've been transported to yet another world similar to the metaverse and donning their disguises again, where the locals represent cognitive versions of those in our world.
The worlds in Tactica are less like palaces in Persona 5 and more so like jails in Strikers. Sprawling areas that the thieves look around in and investigate the situation for each of them, usually involving being conquered by the new baddie in town, the Legionnaires. Tactica now gives us kingdoms, and there's 4 in total throughout the course of the game, set in different places and points in time. The ruler of the first kingdom we run into is Marie, spelt like Marie, as in Marie from Persona 4. I really hope she doesn't appear in Persona Q3 should that ever happen, because that would mean having to differentiate Marie from Marie in a script, and oh my god, the thought of that hurts my head.
Yeah, ditto to that. What's up with this series and taking 2 distinct characters with names spelt exactly alike, or characters with spelling so similar they may as well be the same?
I don't know, man. But anyway, Marie is a power-hungry overlord, with the Legionnaires acting as her slaves. But she also adds most of the Phantom Thieves to her army once she brainwashes them with magic. The only ones to make it out are Joker and Morgana. And things are starting to look pretty dicey after Marie drags them both through tarmac, not leaving a scratch on them. But thankfully, some assistance arrives from one of the newest characters in the series, Arena, the leader of the rebellion against Marie's treachery. She takes Joker and Morgana back to her hideout. Before asking them if they were for Marie, shouldn't she really have done that first?
Hey, who are we to question her logic? After all, it's the closest we've got to a Persona 5 Arena. Yeah, thank you. I'm here all week. So Joker and Morgana join up with Irina's rebel corps and set out to rescue their friends from Marie's clutches. As they storm the castle though, they run into Toshiro Kasukabe, the politician that was missing earlier, as well as a brainwashed Anin Futaba. Irina, however, figures out to use her magical flag of freedom to snap them out of it. Don't ask, just roll with it. Toshiro has, and I'm sure you all saw this coming, so all together now, amnesia. He can only remember his name and that he's a Diet member, but nothing else. And Marie seems to have some sort of connection to him. We'll be coming back to that in a minute though, because we need to focus on rescuing the other thieves, and soon enough we do just that. Once the thieves are back together again, Toshiro remembers that Marie in this world is based on Marie Anto in the real world, who, as you might have guessed, is Toshiro's fiancé. A vile, horrible woman who arranged the marriage with Toshiro's father and emotionally manipulates her husband-to-be so that she can get into the Diet building and acquire power and wealth for both herself and future father-in-law. The stuff Marie comes out with is pretty over-the-top foul, even for a Persona game. But after getting further into the castle, we encounter Marie one last time. There, Toshiro stands up for himself and we defeat her in battle, freeing the citizens of this kingdom. Only to get to the second one soon after a door appears because there's no way an RPG has just one dungeon.
This one takes place in the Edo period and is run by Lord Yoshiki, who not only turns out to be the cognitive version of Toshiro's father, but has tricked the townsfolk into worshipping him in exchange for his so-called love. Anybody who defies Yoshiki are sent to labor camps, where they're working to the bone and being tortured, so we have to expose the truth in order to form another rebellion. Much like Marie, Yoshiki also treats Toshiro like absolute shit, though he talks to him in a calmer, more parental tone to get him to do what he wants, rather than blatantly yelling at him like Marie does. It's only when Toshiro fights back that Yoshiki starts revealing his true colors and gets angry with him, threatening to ruin his life if he doesn't comply. At this point, it's pretty clear that the world everyone's been transported to seems to be based on Toshiro's mind, right down to this other woman named Yuki helping the Rebel Corps throughout this portion of the game, primarily by giving them disguises to infiltrate Yoshiki's castle and expose his secrets to his followers. After a speech from Irina and Toshiro that are basically no different to what they did in the last kingdom, the townspeople rise up and act as a distraction to Yoshiki's army. It's here that Yuki's also exposed to being a version of Toshiro's deceased mother in the real world. She suffered from a great illness and dealt with Yoshiki's abuse frequently, but nevertheless loved Toshiro with all of her heart. Feeling bad for Yuki, Toshiro took her to an amusement park after breaking her out of the hospital, but she drops dead on her way back, with Yoshiki blaming it all on Toshiro for disobeying him.
That's pretty damn messed up, but he'll get his comeuppance soon enough, as Yuki leads this kingdom's revolution to overthrow Yoshiki and defeat him at last, but not before he unleashes one final attack against Toshiro, with Yuki taking the bullet for him and dying in front of her son yet again. Yuki tells Toshiro that her death was never his fault and that he should move on without feeling so guilty, and Irina announces their success to the citizens. Another door pops up afterwards, leading us to the third kingdom, which takes place in Toshiro's school, and this is where things get a little more interesting. So far with the last two kingdoms, the plot's been pretty much the same. The villains are unsympathetic beyond compare and just want nothing aside from power and order. The villain of the third kingdom is unfortunately not written much better, and I was convinced that this was going to take place in Yasogami High because the backgrounds look eerily similar to the stills in the Arena games, and I was sorely disappointed that they didn't go that route. How awesome would it have been to end up in the same school as the investigation team and they had to figure out where they were? Maybe even have Persona 4 serial killer as the bad guy for this one. It's fan service, sure, but what a totally missed opportunity. No, the ruler this time is actually the principal of the school called Ichiro Nakabachi, who, stop us if you've heard this before, has blackmailed and abused the other students. However, unlike Kamoshida, who did similar crimes in Persona 5 to mostly uphold his reputation as a star Olympian and use that to his advantage in exchange for ensuring students get to a good college, Nakabachi just does not seem to have a reason to be an asshole. He threatens to ruin the students' futures, but he doesn't really get anything out of it.
Nakabachi controlling the school isn't the only thing going on in this kingdom though. The goal for this one is to collect keys that unlock pieces of Toshiro's memory, showing the relationship between him and another student named Eri Natsuhara in the student council. And yes, it's painfully obvious who this really is, but the Phantom Thieves don't immediately put it all together. They only notice that Arina and Eri have similar personalities and looks, but they don't even point out that the two basically share a name. All they've done is simply space out the N and A from Arina and and that's it. How are these the same Phantom Thieves that saved Japan from a mind-controlling god and are gonna do it again in the future with strikers? Isn't Makoto also supposed to be like the brains of the group? Why aren't there any light bulbs lighting up in her head at this time? Anyway, as the days go by, Eri and Toshiro help everyone in the school with their issues, but things get a little more tricky when it comes to exposing Nakabachi's crimes. He's now gotten so many students and even has some of the teachers under his thumb that no one is willing to step up and act as a witness. But eventually, Eri and Toshiro convince the other students to band together and gather evidence to get Nakabachi fired from the school board. Nakabachi then finally shows his face at the kingdom just as the Phantom Thieves take him on, and while they succeed in the battle, this part of the story is not quite over yet, as Nakabachi uses his last power to make Arena disappear and causes the school to crumble. In another flashback afterwards, Eri and Toshiro also discover that some of the students have been harassing Nakabachi themselves and only joined the revolution to make him pay for things that didn't even happen to them, or were extremely petty issues like detentions or poor grades when they rightfully deserved them.
It's good to know that even the students can be pricks sometimes, missing the entire point of forming an army and instead just fulfill their own selfish needs. That isn't to say Nakabachi is redeemable in any way though, and it doesn't help that because he's been cooped up in his house for so long from all the pressure, he completely snaps and follows Eri and Toshiro to a train station and pushes Eri onto a moving train. Eri somehow survives that accident and Toshiro greatly injures his hand while trying to reach out to her, with Eri feeling enormous guilt that she might have destroyed both hers and Toshiro's lives. Since then, the two of them had lost touch with each other, but Toshiro currently doesn't have the guts to reach her again, despite clearly wanting to, especially since he's carrying some guilt of his own. The thieves go and rescue Arena, but run into the real mastermind behind the Third Kingdom, and it's a Shadow Toshiro, the embodiment of all of Toshiro's regrets and hatred, telling us that Toshiro truthfully despised Eri, and in a twist that surprises absolutely no one, Arena is actually a husk of Eri created from Toshiro's cognition. Oh my god, I totally didn't see that coming. I'll have to rethink everything that's happened in the story up to now. Shadow Toshiro traps the Phantom Thieves in dirty toilet paper so that we can listen to him ramble for a bit, before Arena wakes up and encourages the real Toshiro to fight and stand up for himself, not only saving Arena, but also the Phantom Thieves. At this point, Toshiro has done so much rebelling that the game says it's been long enough for him to go without a persona. In this case, his persona is Arena, turning into the badass looking Ernesto. No idea why the cape needs bullets too, but it's cool, so I'll allow it. Using his new abilities, Toshiro and the Phantom Thieves tussle with his shadow self for a bit, before he tries to scare the actual Toshiro by transforming into a more demented version of Eri. Not gonna lie, this part is pretty damn awesome based on the design of this thing alone. It looks creepy as hell and ripped right out of Catherine, I love it. The fight itself goes on for arguably a bit too long, but I can forgive it just for the spectacle. I'd be alright if this ended up being the final boss of the game, but of course it isn't, because it's not a Persona title without some dickhead god to fight during the climax. This time we have Samael, which is a confusing name already since there's a Persona called Samael, but again, this is the same series that has two characters named Marie and Marie, and two more characters called Yusuke and Yosuke. Are we really surprised now? Anyway, Samael, in the most complicated way imaginable and using an entire friggin' dictionary to explain, creates these cognitive worlds to stave off those with a rebellious side to them in order to maintain peace throughout the world, so pretty much every god in every RPG then. Good grief, that's one of the worst types to deal with.
Good grief, that's one of the worst types to deal with.
I didn't sound like that, did I? Samael had his eyes on Toshiro once he started to feel his inner rebellion after seeing the Phantom Thieves hijack the monitors during Shido's calling card. Why he's never thought to go after the Phantom Thieves before, I don't know. But you go after some Diet member who's not even done anything yet? Tactica's set practically at the end of the main game. Surely Samael would have noticed something was going on, wouldn't he? What, did he sleep through his alarm?
Probably. But Samael offers the thieves a chance to go back home, with Toshiro forgetting everything that's been happening, so long as they all stop trying to prevent his actions. But naturally, they refuse and challenge Samael because they already went through all this before. Why should this be any different? Samael retreats like a little bitch for now, but Lavenza suddenly comes in with the entirety of the Velvet Room now converted into a train. I mean, if the Velvet Room can turn into an elevator, a car, or a damn jail cell, why not just have it be a train at this point? After many long minutes basically explaining that Samael's a douche and we need to stomp his ass into the ground, the Phantom Thieves investigate the fourth and final kingdom, though there isn't any meaningful story that occurs, outside of Toshiro now being an additional party member. Eventually, everybody reaches Samael and engages in a pretty standard boss battle before he explodes, and the Phantom Thieves don't have to worry about any more gods. That is, until Japanese Tony Stark develops Emma in a few months. Enjoy that break while you can, guys. Toshiro returns to an angry Maria and Yoshiki, who are preparing a script for him to try to win him some approval points. points, but he shreds it and steps down from being Prime Minister for now, while exposing the crimes of his father and fiancé at the press conference, learning to finally climb his way up on his own. Toshiro then calls the Phantom Thieves one last time to thank them for everything they've done, hoping to meet them again someday.
Yeah, let's just put him with the rest of new side characters that won't ever appear again. At least in the post-credit scene, Toshiro runs into a handicapped Eri in a joyful reunion, ending Persona 5 Tactica. Well, that was certainly a story. I don't think we've learned anything that we haven't already in previous Persona 5 games. Hell, Persona games period. It's an almost nothing kind of plot and heavily relies on you liking Toshiro as a character. If you don't, then this narrative is really not going to do it for you. Fortunately for me, I enjoy him enough. Well, once I got to the third kingdom anyway, which is like half the game. I did pity and even somewhat relate to his situation during the first couple of kingdoms, but I was struggling to see how he was any different to all the other victims we've been helping in previous titles. However, once we got to the third kingdom and we got to see all of his flashbacks with Eri, I thought that was way more engaging. There's a pretty cute friendship between the two of them and wanting to help their fellow students. And what's refreshing is that they never do hook up, at least not on screen anyway. The ending where they meet up again is also quite heartwarming. It's great that even when writing more minor characters in the Persona series, Atlus knows how to make you feel something. I'd say I like Arena a bit more than Toshiro overall, and I hope one day we'll get to see that concept art of her in a mainline Persona game come to life. But that's where most of the praise ends for me with this story. The villains, for instance, are all pretty underdeveloped. There isn't a single aspect in their writing that makes them deeper, complex characters to justify their actions, and are just too over-the-top devilish for my liking. Persona 5 gets a bit of criticism for having cartoonishly evil antagonists, like the stuff they do is just so extreme that it doesn't feel believable, and I've always kinda disagreed on that, but I can definitely put that same critique towards the villains of Tactica. Say what you will about the palace rulers or jail monarchs, but they at least mostly knew how to talk like actual human beings. These guys speak as if they're in a freaking Disney movie, like they're so self-aware of how cruel they are that they announce it everywhere they go. It's just plain silly now. The villains aren't the only problem with the story though. It gets a little annoying when most of Toshiro's troubles seem to relate to issues that one of the Phantom Thieves had in Persona 5. When he's describing what he's been going through, you know exactly which Phantom Thief is going to pop up and say something like, yeah, it's just like what happened with me. I don't know, there's something that feels a bit pretentious when you keep calling back to Persona 5 like that. It's basically them poking you and being like, hey, remember that? I bet you do. Yes, I do remember. I was there. It's hard not to remember what happened. Can we please move on now?
Persona 5 Tactica's story is the epitome of generic spin-off game. It borderline rips its structure and premise wholesale from the Persona Q games, but lacks the crossover aspect that made those games so likable to begin with. Seeing the cast from different games come together and interact was a pretty special occasion, which led to some fun moments for the characters to shine. There was even some nuanced character beats buried in the hijinks. Persona 5 Tactica solely focuses on the Phantom Thieves, which is fine, but these are characters that have already been thoroughly explored in their original game and in more ambitious sequel stories. There's not much else that can be squeezed from this character dynamic, which leads to a very familiar song and dance, one that's especially boring if you've consumed a lot of P5 media up until now. Where Tactica's story really shines is in the new supporting cast, but even then, your mileage may vary. I'll just say this, if you're not a fan of Toshiro, then this story is going to do nothing for you. While the game initially presents Arena as the new character to get excited for, the real star of the game is Toshiro. If you're unable to connect with this guy, then you're probably not going to like the story. Thankfully, I was able to get invested in this character, to the point where I was genuinely interested in seeing how his character would be fleshed out. For my money, Toshiro is the best part about this game's story, but it comes at the cost of being one of the only interesting things that happens here. The rest is just a safe, predictable mush that we've all seen many times before.
I suppose we should talk about the art style too. It's got a similar look to the Persona Q games, which back then I thought were well expressive and had an okay use of body language. But I gotta say, while I wasn't originally sold on the new style, mostly thanks to the humongous hands and feet, I eventually grew to appreciate it. The portraits don't move as smoothly as the 3D models in the Q games did, but the detail on them is exquisite, and you get a clearer idea of how they're feeling. The art direction this time around was done by Hanako Oribe, who previously worked on the animation side of the Persona 5 games. She was the one who decided on the characters' oddly shaped bodies to match the style of comic books. And Tactica's director, Naoya Maeda, stated that if the Phantom Thieves maintained their normal proportions, they would look more like stick figures, which I guess I could see.
You know, I never got the hate for this art style. Sure, the action figure proportions are a little silly and take some time to get used to, but I think it works well. The official artwork made for this game looks great, and every character has readable designs and gameplay. It's easy to tell at a glance which character is where, and the exaggerations of the animations really sells their personalities.
Sadly, the characters themselves are once again a bit more one-note than they were in Persona 5, but thankfully it's not nearly as bad as it was in the Q games where they just focused on specific traits of theirs. Though they still do that occasionally, especially Morgana, not being a cat, yet has the gall to tease Toshiro about playing the amnesia card. Hypocrite much? You also got Ryuji being the dumb one again, Futaba being the gamer, and Makoto being the passive-aggressive one for some odd reason. Like, I don't even get that last one. Outside of Kanashiro's palace, did Makoto really get that angry afterwards? Dialogue is a bit hit and miss too. The latter's especially bad on Yoshiki's end by saying the word love more times than Kingdom Hearts enjoys overusing light, darkness, and heart in their scripts. The laughs are extremely rare as well, like so rare I couldn't even find any while looking back through my footage, which I suppose also suggests they weren't good enough jokes to begin with if I can't remember it. Didn't help that the townsfolk in each kingdom have these high-pitched distorted voices that don't take very long to get annoying. Seriously, why did they think this was a good idea?
Hey, what's your mouth? Are you objecting to Lord Yoshiki's methods?
Well, it's not even as if we're needed to point out the game's problems, Josh. Sometimes Tactica does it itself. There's already Morgana rolling his eyes over a false messiah, which he does twice in the same scene. We've also got Lavenza not knowing why the Velvet Room turns into a train, though Makoto just says to roll with it for now. It's like even ATLUS have come to notice their own tropes nowadays.
So the story's a little disappointing, but not really unexpected. It's very rare for a Persona spin-off to have something deep and meaningful, and this is just another one in the pile that I personally didn't really care a whole lot for. But luckily the gameplay does save Tactica from being totally underwhelming.
As mentioned at the start of this video, and I guess by judging by the game's title, Persona 5 Tactica is, well, tactics-based. The Phantom Thieves are able to move to any space within their limited range, and attack enemies in the same turn while taking cover if possible. Including Arena, there's 8 characters to choose for your party, but you're only allowed a maximum of 3, though you can luckily swap out Joker if need be, meaning you also don't get a game over if he dies. When you clear a stage, the Phantom Thieves gain a collective amount of experience points rather than individual members getting their own, as well as a few sub-personas. Yes, the sub-personas from the Persona Q games are back and work pretty much how they did before, i.e. giving extra stats to the party members it's attached to, on top of the skills that they carry. The Velvet Room is also once again available, should you wish to combine 2 sub-personas for an even stronger one. Persona fusing is what you've come to expect by now, and works just as well here as in any other Persona game. But the slight downside is that while they already have a skill by default, you can only transfer one skill between personas, which is much more limiting than what we're used to.
Yeah, I kind of feel as if we needed at least one more slot available to put another skill in. One just seems a bit overkill in my opinion, taking into account that the skill cost in this game is quite high compared to other Persona titles. That might not actually matter a great deal though, because surprisingly, Persona 5 Tactica does not encourage you to exploit any weaknesses. Mostly because nobody has any weaknesses. Instead, the game wants you to look out for enemies not in cover. Bits of terrain are spread across each map to help you resist attacks or nullify them altogether. For you see, the players on the battlefield are all incredibly vulnerable when not hiding behind something, getting easily knocked down with one blow, and giving the enemy a one more. The catch, however, is that the enemies will also suffer the same fate if they're exposed, which is a necessary strategy for certain side quests that require you to do the whole mission in a single turn.
If you do find an asshole camper though, most of your party skills will leave a status ailment on them, where a succeeding character can then perform a follow-up attack that'll ensure a one more. One mores can be quite broken in this game, as it not only grants that party member another action, but it also resets their movement so they can go even further across the map. In fact, there are even some levels that want you to abuse that mechanic to reach the goal. It's pretty crazy just how much you can get away with in Tactica before the enemy even has a chance to retaliate, and that's not including the triple threats, which are basically this game's version of all-out attacks. When an enemy gets knocked over and you set your party in a triangle formation, enemies caught in the middle will suffer great damage upon activation.
Most levels have various side objectives like not losing party members or clearing the stage within X number of turns, and the triple threats are great for achieving those side objectives. They're about as satisfying as the all-out attacks in the other games, but I can't help but feel that meeting requirements for a triple threat can be picky as hell with the shaping. I swear there were plenty of instances where I created a perfect 180-degree triangle and the game still wouldn't register a triple threat, but then I find myself making the spaces between characters so thin that the triangle's basically a straight line now, and that suddenly works. works. How exactly Tactica determines what's appropriate for triple threats is beyond me. At least they still work even when behind cover though. And if a party member doesn't do anything during their turn, their attacks will charge up for the next turn. They didn't fix the problem strikers had with Futaba talking too much during battles, however. I don't mind her when you're hitting enemies or vice versa because her dialogue changes enough to not be exasperating. But if you even just slightly graze through some cover, she will not shut up about how you won't get hit by attacks. Yes, Futaba, it is a great spot, as well as the other 49 spaces you said were great spots. It sucks that I find myself getting more annoyed by Futaba with each passing spin-off, and I don't want that to happen. She's an interesting character, but they continue not to portray her the best outside of Persona 5 and Royal.
While you are only allowed to have 3 party members at a time, baton passes are available to substitute in another character should someone die. However, you'll probably just want to start over or revert to your last turn anyways, because as Josh said, one of the optional objectives in most missions requires you to not lose any party members. So if you want to get that extra XP and money, you gotta get good, scrub. At least you'll have Toshiro as a 4th permanent party member to the team once you hit the last kingdom, and he's got some pretty decent abilities. Between story missions, you can do a whole bunch of prep before tackling the next one, like the side quests we talked about earlier, fusing sub-personas, or doing a bit of skill management to improve the Phantom Thieves' capabilities.
Since the Phantom Thieves only have one experience bar shared between all of them, that means the only way we can make them stronger is by assigning growth points, or GP, to individual skills, with more powerful skills costing more GP to enable, and the only way to earn GP is by doing more battles and leveling up. The trade-off, however, is that even after doing all side quests, reaching the end game, and watching all the little skits that contain nothing more than flavor text for smaller growth points, there's never going to be enough GP to activate every skill at once, so you have to prioritize certain upgrades depending on the situation you're in. You're encouraged to swap out party members for each mission so that they have maximum performance in battle, but it doesn't increase the experience or GP in any way, just extra health and mana, which seems like it should have been something included really and highly influence you to experiment with party combinations. The good news though is that you can deactivate abilities at any time and earn back the GP it originally cost with no strings attached. So while you may not be able to use that one skill for the time being, you can make up for it by enabling another one.
This is a pretty neat system we have here, and it's a great way to encourage experimentation. The only annoying thing about all this management is that you can't make a preset for when you need a particular setup suitable for the mission you're currently on. It's a bit tedious having to keep deselecting and reselecting all these abilities just for one mission, only to then go back to something you're more comfortable with once you're done, wasting even more time.
Yeah, I'm on the same boat really. It's a great idea all around, just needs a little more tweaking. And for me, I also found the new voltage attacks a bit lackluster. You've got this star that fills up as you're whacking enemies around, where when full, you can have one of the party members perform a special skill. Maybe I needed to upgrade these more, but I only found them handy on the odd occasion. The ones I used the most were Jokers and Arsens for doing extra damage and getting an additional action, and once in a while I might take advantage of Yusuke's and Goemons just to have the enemies focus on the clones I create and get them off my back for a couple of minutes. I don't know, did you use voltage attacks a whole bunch, Nam?
Oh yeah, those are a thing. I can't quite say I was fully into this either. I can think of a few good skills, but ultimately the mechanic ends up feeling a little too situational for my liking. But on the other end of the spectrum, the voltage attacks for the DLC characters are insanely busted. Infinite movement and extra turns? Yeah, I'll take that any day over on Stupid Bomb, thanks.
Tactica's not an overly challenging game, but sometimes things can get hairy, though I do overall find this to be quite fun and even a little brain-teasing. Much better than I thought it would be. But I guess the last thing we haven't yet talked about is the DLC. Though it's traditional stuff by ATLUS we should be no stranger to by now. There are sub-personas you can summon for free that are incredibly game-breaking and I'll personally never use unless I'm achievement hunting, as well as exclusive weapons with decent stats to help you get started, and a new storyline that they decide to release on launch day rather than a few months like a normal company. Not the most offensive DLC ATLUS has done so far, but still could be better. It's miles ahead of Soul Hackers 2's DLC at least.
The extra chapter is titled Repaint Your Heart, which is the only time you get to have Akechi and Kasumi in your party, and it has an entirely separate, albeit much smaller plot compared to the main game that we're also going to be spoiling. A street artist by the name of Guernica has been leaving graffiti on government property under protest, but things get a little more strange when Ren, Akechi, and Kasumi come across a mural of Arsene. While the three of them are speculating over this, they get transported to another world simply called the Streets. There they come across Guernica, as she causes a great massacre massacre by shooting and blowing up the citizens of the streets. Jesus Christ. This is mostly because she's under the influence of her talking parrot Jerry. Helping the thieves in this matter is a girl named Luca, who seems to know Garnica quite well, explaining to us that she started to feel violent because her first statement piece got destroyed. This put Guernica in a huge fit of rage, which Jerry took full advantage of. And in order to return Guernica to normal, the Phantom Thieves have got to get the pieces of the statement back.
Are we just not gonna address that there's a talking parrot in this game? Called Jerry, no less?
Well, I mean, Morgana is a talking cat, so is a bird all that different?
Yeah, but the characters at least acknowledged that first, and everybody else in the real world could just hear meows because nobody had heard Morgana in the metaverse. Jerry's only now turned up and nobody seems to give a shit. They're more focused on Guernica than anything else.
I would think after everything they've been through thus far, a talking parrot isn't really gonna faze them.
I guess, but it still feels kinda odd. By the way, does anybody else think Guernica looks a lot like Bouzette?
What goes on through that head of yours exactly?
Anywho, as a last-ditch effort for assistance, Guernica painted Arsene in a brief moment before she snapped in order to summon the Phantom Thieves. For a while, there's not a great deal of story from here. You're just collecting the 3 pieces of Guernica's mural, and battle Guernica herself a few times while Jerry continues to manipulate her. But we do find out that Luca is really a version of Guernica's older sister who died in the real world. The two of them did their best to survive in the streets based on instincts and food found in the garbage. Somebody threw out a whole-ass burger? Why the hell would you do that? It looks goddamn delicious. The statement piece was created by the two of them anyway, which is why it was so important to Guernica and why she's now so pissed off about it breaking. The only reason Jerry wants to mentally torture Guernica so much is because she wants to unleash her into the real world so that her rage will cause God knows how many casualties. Presumably this is to please Jerry's superior, who we never actually see, but that's not elaborated on all too much. Regardless, we need to stop her in Guernica, and after retrieving all pieces of the original mural, Luca, through the power of hope, yeah that's how they put it, changes Guernica back to her original self, fading away in the process. This greatly displeases Jerry as she reveals who she really is. Oh, let me guess, she's a god.
Let me guess. You're a god.
You know, do you even need this game? Because you seem to be doing alright critiquing yourself.
You know the drill by now. The Phantom Thieves defeat Jerry in a final battle, they return to the real world after saying goodbye to Guernica with yet another fucking memory wipe, and Guernica continues to protest with her art.
This story was just alright for me, much like the main one. I guess this plot does something a little bit different compared to what we talked about earlier, but it's again nothing all that special. It maybe could have been more interesting if, say, Guernica was one of Madarame's pupils and we could include Yusuke in the narrative, although I couldn't imagine how much they'd hammer his eccentricity of art into the ground. I don't know, man, there's almost nothing to talk about with this one. It just sorta comes and goes. I cleared the whole thing in about 4 hours. You'll have Akechi and Kasumi available in the main game once you beat it, and there are extra challenges you can do to test your skills, but I'm in no rush to do these right now. The gameplay for this chapter is exactly what you have in the main campaign, with the gimmick being that you can only attack if the square you're on is either splashed in your color of paint, or no paint at all. If you step into a space that has the enemy's paint color, then you can't attack whatsoever, and vice versa. It's like Splatoon if it was slightly less chaotic. I was thinking this whole paint thing was going to be extremely irritating, but I actually didn't mind it too much. In fact, it sorta made things more refreshing compared to not only the core game, but tactics games in general. I suppose similar to the main campaign, I ended up enjoying the gameplay for this DLC more than I did the story. It's got some catchy beats too. We haven't really brought out the soundtrack yet in this video, but I personally found it to be so disappointing. It's the first Persona game not to have Shoji Meguro involved, and my god does it show. Everything just sounds like the exact same tune to me and overuses the electric guitar. Even Persona 5's vocalist Lynn doesn't quite put as much energy into it as she's done in the past. I bet she's probably getting sick of all these games too. I mean, what's this game got for me to remember? Truth or Dare? Nah, not really. Inextinguishable? I immediately forget that as soon as it stops. Well, at least it briefly has Prison Labor from Royal. That doesn't count. Also, am I going insane, or does Yoshiki's boss music sound way too close to Stay Alive from Portal? The DLC's tracks, on the other hand, was the first time in Tactica that I found myself toe-tapping. I think Lotus Juice got involved with a couple of these, and I quite enjoyed them. Is this what it's come to now? Has Atlus's DLC practices gotten so bad that they have to leave the good stuff behind a paywall? One of these days, I'm sure they'll make the true ending to a Persona game as DLC. And that's Persona 5 Tactica. It's not my personal favorite spin-off in the series, but it did end up being a lot better than I expected it to be. In terms of Persona side games, I'd still say the best one is probably Strikers, because it not only had fun gameplay, but also an engaging enough story that tackled a few subject matters. Ultimately, though, it's Tactica's date of release and mere existence that's put it at a major disadvantage. But what did you think of it, Nam?
Persona 5 Tactica was a game that I wasn't expecting to like all too much. On the surface, it shares a lot of the same negatives I have with a good majority of these spin-off games. However, despite those lesser qualities, Tactica's core gameplay and mechanics are enough to give it a pass for me. After all the tutorials are out of the way and you're able to let loose on the battlefield, Tactica is a very fulfilling game. There's plenty of customization, fun map design, and a good amount of content for you to sink your teeth into. There's a part of me that thinks that this is the strongest Persona spin-off game from a gameplay perspective. And as much as I'd want to call it my favorite just for that, it's just that the story and those characters, man. The narrative is so uninteresting for most of the runtime, and by the time it starts to find its footing, we're already on the final dungeon. The gameplay is fun, but it only makes up for so much.
Unfortunately, even though I do enjoy Persona 5 Tactica, whether or not the game is any good doesn't really matter. It came out at a time when a lot of people are starting to grow tired of the Phantom Thieves and ATLUS showing no interest in moving forward with the series, on top of showing up with another Persona title that fans were likely more intrigued by. I think it's kind of the opposite problem to what happened with Metroid Prime Federation Force, where that game got announced after years of nothing hinting the future of the Metroid franchise. Tactica instead came to us when we already have too many Persona 5 games, and as a result, this is probably going to be seen as just another Persona title and not much more, the lacking story notwithstanding. Vanilla Persona 5 got released in the West almost 7 years ago now, Royal's nearly 4 years old, and Strikers is already 3 years old. It's been too long now and we just need the next numbered entry to happen soon. Doesn't help that Tactica is also being charged the same amount as a mainline Persona game, and the DLCs is overpriced as it always is. It's a little under 30 hours even when doing all side content, so you get your money's worth, but I'd still say maybe wait for a sale on this one. Even as a tactics game, it is fun, but perhaps not the most complex or replayable one in the genre outside of skill management. That said, it has encouraged me to try out other tactics games with a similar gameplay style. Maybe I'll even try out the Devil Survivor series soon. Only time will tell, but as for Tactica, this is a case of a good game appearing at the wrong time. And with that, I'd like to thank Nam's Compendium for joining me in today's review, and if you'd like to see his more personal take on Persona 5 Tactica, as well as other Mega 10 content and RPGs in general, do feel free to have a look at his channel, which I'll link below.
Yeah, thanks for having me on this one, man. Like Josh said, I make videos on RPGs, both on Mega 10 games as well as other stuff like Final Fantasy. If that sounds up your alley, consider stopping by at some point.
It's been good to have you, my dude. And so, I think I might do a remake of another game I've talked about in the past, and it's on Mario vs. Donkey Kong. What, did you think it'd be Persona 3 Reload? Right, look, I have to make sure to cover the non-RPG fanatics once in a while, alright? I know they're crazy for not liking Persona, but that's the way it is, unfortunately. I promise I will do Persona 3 Reload immediately afterwards, though. So, in the meantime, thanks everybody for watching, stay safe, stay healthy, and take care of yourselves. Getting to put on the... Oh, jeez. Getting to put on this costume again is... Oh, jeez. 2 this time. I think the problem here is that the... Damn it. Forgetting my lines. Thanks everybody for watching. Stay safe. Damn it, I screwed up. No.